Hi, welcome everybody. This is Jeremy Crow, and welcome to my Walpurgisnacht Livestream 2020. I see there's already several people here waiting. That's awesome. Usually I start these things and there's only maybe 2 people or so. Yeah, it's great to see that there's a bunch of people. This time I managed to get um, about an hour and a half of lead time before I actually did the live stream. Usually, I only give like less than half an hour, sometimes even like 5 minutes lead time before I actually do one of these things. But I knew that I was going to be able to do it tonight, so um, I was able to kind of put it out there, promote it, and get some people. Damon Wolf says, "Hey Jeremy, good evening. Hey Damon, I'm glad you could make it. Oliver, happy Walpurgisnacht to you as well. I'm glad everybody managed to pop in tonight. I know it's a big night for those on the left-hand path and pagans in general. It's a big night for a lot of people, and on the left-hand path in particular, this night is special because on 19 on this night in 1966, Anton LaVey famously shaved his head and declared the beginning of year one of the year of Satan, and that was 66 into it's 2020, so that would have been 54 years ago. So this would be the beginning of year 54 of the year of Satan. So happy Satanic New Year to all of you as well. Damon says, Melissa says, what happened to his hair? Yeah, just got rid of it. I like having shaved head. I like having long hair too, but it's a lot of work. Yeah, so Sadistic Queen says, hi, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. Hi, Sadistic Queen. Oliver said, just finished my Rite to Leviathan. For once, timing was perfect. Yeah, that's great when you can do various different rituals or celebrations on the actual night. It doesn't always work out that way, and sometimes you got to pick the closest day that you're able to that day. So it is always nice when you can do it on the actual day. I like that too. Let's see. Jay Lloyd says, finally caught a live stream. Greetings from Texas. Greetings to you, Jay Lloyd. Glad you could make it. G.A. Morris says, hello, Jeremy. Thomas Leroy, the one of the founders of the sect of the Horned God. It's a pleasure to have you on here tonight, Thomas. And happy Walpurgisnacht to all of you. And happy Satanic New Year as well. As I was saying, if you didn't catch the very beginning of the live stream, this would be year 54, the beginning of year 54 of the year of Satan, as declared by Anton LaVey. And that's kind of what I had in mind to talk about tonight, is that whole concept of declaring a new era or redefining time and calendars and such. And the magical power of doing that kind of thing. We have Clint Simpson says, 93, howdy, new to Walpurgisnacht, interested in some more information. Also, any update on the reprint of Intro into the left-hand path? Yeah, well, yeah, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that tonight. And Derek says, greetings, Oregon, and from Moncton. Yeah, that was a really cool Commodore 64 game that Derek and I used to play when we were younger. Oh, Oliver said, no, I meant that I finished just in time for the stream. But yeah, good timing for rituals is cool too. Okay, cool. Damon Wolf, yeah, what year are we of the new Luciferian era now? And that's also one of the things that I was going to bring up in this stream tonight. So we are currently in year 7 of the new Luciferian era, or NLE. And so It started off with year 0. It didn't start with year 1 like the year of Satan did when Anton LaVey declared that. But when I did my thing, when I kind of recognized the confluence of forces, and I felt like there was what you might call an aeonic change. I recognized the December 21st of the year 2012 of Common Era as that kind of turning point, that kind of end of the world and the beginning of a new one. And so my wife and I did a ritual to commemorate that, and we recognize that as the beginning of year 0, which is the darkest day of the year, would be the winter solstice. So it all starts at 0 in my mind. 0 is almost like the womb, like the entry point in a sense, and I kind of think of it as that first year is kind of like the gestation period almost, and further manifestation as time goes on. And so, yeah, right now we are in year 7. So, but it did start at year 0. So, kind of like a baby, right? A baby is born. You don't say they're 1 on on the day they're born. They're 0 still, right? So the same way with the new Luciferian era. It started at 0, and right now we are year 7. And on the winter solstice of this year will be the Luciferian New Year, and that will be the first day of year 8 NLE. Okay, we have a couple other comments here. Thunderstruck says, "Hi, Jeremy from Toronto." Oh, cool. Glad to catch your live stream again. Excellent. Very cool that you're in Toronto. I'm not that far. I moved just a little bit outside of the city. Not a bit, what was it? The end of September last year. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time in Toronto. A lot of times when people ask me where I live, I still say Toronto usually because nobody knows the place that I'm in. Maybe you do, but DJ Wolf says, "Just a quick OT. Just know you changed my life." Oh, wow. Thank you, DJ Wolf. I really appreciate that, that you letting me know. And I'm glad that I was able to help you in some way, or, have such an impact on you. Hail Satan says, "Hi, happy Walpurgisnacht, brother." It's always glad to have you on there, Hail Satan, and I always love saying your name. So, kind of wanted to get into this whole Aeonic thing, and one of the most well-known of these would be, of course, Aleister Crowley, when he declared the new Aeon of Horus. And what was that? I believe it was 1904, I think, that he recognized that as the beginning of the new Aeon of Horus. And he recognized previous aeons, the Aeon of Osiris, which would be the dying and resurrecting god, which of course also corresponds to Christ, which dominated the previous 2,000 years. And before that would have been the Aeon of Isis in Crowley's paradigm, or his idea, his worldview that he talked about. So what would that be? I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was, this is just from memory, 1904, I thought, wasn't it? And so that would be what, 116 years since the declaration of the new Aeon of Horus. So there's other times that people have declared a new Aeon as well, besides just Crowley and Anton LaVey and myself, but also what the Temple of Set the guy who founded the Temple of Set. I'm blanking right now. I know it's crazy, but Canada Bear says, "Hi Jeremy, sorry I'm late." RL Sishko says, "Oops, almost forgot." I'm glad you could both make it. FPS Kiffner. Oh, Michael Aquino, Dr. Aquino, of course. So yeah, he declared the Aeon of Set, and I'm not sure the exact year. I could look it up. Maybe somebody who's on the live stream now knows that year. But yeah, there have been several times. There was also the Aeon of Maat, the Egyptian goddess of justice, a feathered goddess, which was supposed to be something that you could just tap into rather than specifically time-based, which is very interesting. And I think that really all of them are that, ultimately. Although, of course, we live in linear time for the most part, except for when we're on the astral. Time doesn't flow in the same linear way when you are on the astral. But on the material plane, there was a date when those were announced or declared. And in the Temple of Set's view, they talk about a word, the word of the Magus being spoken, and that being kind of the birth of that new Aeon. And so they said that the word that Crowley spoke was Thelema, which is will. And the what did they say that the word that LaVey said? Do they say he said indulgence? I think is the word that they say he spoke. I think that might be a bit of a retcon. It might be a bit of interpreting things, looking back, but the word that Aquino spoke was Kepher, which means to become or becoming. Something that's a rough translation of it. And it's just the way when I talk about the new Luciferian era starting on December 21st of 2012, which of course is the day that the Mayan long count calendar ended, but it's also the beginning of a new cycle. I think of that as just this point where so many different factors were all converging at once, and this idea of the end of the world was in such a it was in the forefront of so many people's minds across the world, and people were talking about it. It was on the news and everything, and we had just had, not that long before, we had the Y2K event where a lot of people were getting these apocalyptic visions, and they were talking about that it would be a catastrophic event when we hit the year 2000. And that was a bit more mundane in a sense, because people were talking about computer errors and all of the chaos that might have possibly occurred because of computers only looking at the last two digits, and then suddenly it flips over to 00 instead of 99, and all the computers were going to get confused and planes were going to fall out of the sky. And it never happened, but there were people that were predicting the end of the world, and then that didn't really go away. It did have a bit of a lull, but then you had other people predicting, like interpreting the Bible and saying, oh, well, the rapture is going to happen on this day or that day. And people were starting to get, Nibiru, FPS Knifer says Nibiru, right? The return of Planet X. People were saying that a 10th planet was going to re-enter our solar system, or that it's been in our solar system as part of a extremely long orbit but that it was going to be coming back, and that maybe even aliens were going to visit us from that planet. But there were a lot of people talking about a galactic alignment where the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy would be lined up with the sun and the earth all at the same time, and that we would have a clear kind of look right to the supermassive black hole, and that it would cause all kinds of chaos, that there would be a pole shift, all kinds of things like that people were talking about. And of course, even the end of the world. Now, that hit such a huge level of awareness in the public consciousness. It really became a part of the psyche of the collective unconscious, you might say. And I feel like something did happen on that night, that there was a change. Something did change. And I feel like nothing has really been the same ever since. Thunderstruck says Nostradamus is the only one who got some events so right. I'm aware of Nostradamus, but it's not something I ever really studied. One interesting thing, though, about this whole apocalyptic visions is that there was a prophecy. I'm not sure where it came from exactly, but there was a prophecy that there would only be a certain number of popes. And back when I was a teenager, it was still Pope John Paul. Pope John Paul the second, was it, or 32nd? I can't remember right now, but it was Pope John Paul that was the Pope at the time. And I remember I got my first Ouija board. And I was with my father, and he was hanging out with one of his best friends who happened to be a Freemason. I believe he was a 32nd degree Freemason, because he was also a Shriner. And to become a Shriner, you need to either be a 32nd degree Freemason or York Rite Knight Templar before you're eligible to enter the shrine. So he was interested in a lot of esoteric and prophecies and such, and he wouldn't touch the Ouija board, but my father and I, we picked it up and we went home, and my father's friend Richie was there with us, and my father and I tried it out. We put the Ouija board between our knees and in like as a table almost, and we were moving the planchette was moving around really well, and we kept accusing each other of moving it, which always ends up happening for people, especially when they first try out a Ouija board. And I believe that was the first time I'd ever actually tried it. And we couldn't think of questions to ask it, but Richie knew a lot of things about esotericism and prophecies, and he was asking questions, and we were getting the answers, and we were kind of relaying them, and he would ask questions and we would kind of get the answer. And my dad wasn't looking most of the time, and I started not looking as well, and then when it would stop, we would look down and check it. And I remember in particular one question that Richie asked. He said, how many more popes will there be before the end of the world? And it moved, and when it stopped and we looked down, and it said 2. And we both looked over at Richie, and he had this looked like he had seen a ghost, like all the color had drained from his face, and he was like, 2, wow. He said that actually matches another prophecy. And I'd looked it up after that at some point, and saw it, and there's something connected to that, where in this one particular cathedral, I can't remember which cathedral right now, but there's a cathedral that has busts of all the different popes that have ever existed. And there was only a certain number of places left, which also corresponded to that prophecy. So it almost seemed like they knew what the prophecy was and they had allotted that many spots for busts of popes. So since that time, we had Ratzenberger as a pope, and now the current one. So those are two. So according to the prophecy, there will be no other popes before the end of the world. And now that could mean a few different things. It could mean that that they just don't appoint another pope. You know, maybe there'll be a downfall of the Roman Catholic Church somehow. It doesn't necessarily mean that the whole world will end, just that there will not be any more popes until the end of the world. So yeah, it could mean the end of Catholicism. What do we have? A couple comments here. J. Lloyd says, guilty of binge watching most of your lectures, so correct me if I'm wrong, but did I hear you mention the theory that we actually died in 2012? Yeah, that's something that I wanted to get into as well. We have another comment here. A2 Malkus says the monk Arnold Wyon de Sumis Pontificibus. Okay, so I guess that's probably who had that prophecy. And also mentions Siena Cathedral. Okay, so that must be the cathedral that I was referring to. So I do find it interesting. We have all of these apocalyptic visions that are still happening now, and there's this, jokes going around about how many apocalypses have you survived and such. Like a punch card, like a loyalty card. What do you get when you redeem 10 stamps that you've survived 10 apocalypses, But I do feel like the 2012 end of the Mayan long count calendar was the peak of that whole apocalyptic mindset, that whole thing that swept the culture. It hit the zeitgeist. There was even a blockbuster movie made about it, called 2012, and who was in it? John Cusack, I think, was the main actor, the main star of that. And there was an arc that they all had to get on. It was kind of very biblical, but it was a pretty good movie. I liked it. It was an action disaster movie, which I thought was good. But yeah, it really hit mainstream consciousness. And it hasn't been, that whole apocalyptic thing hasn't been as much since then. Although it does feel like, a lot of people are saying, well, what are you doing during the apocalypse, because of the whole COVID-19 thing. So it hasn't really exactly gone away, but I feel like that December 21st, 2012 was that pivotal moment where it hit that climax. And so who mentioned that? Jay Lloyd mentioned that we died in 2012. So that was something that I became obsessed with, the idea of, for, I don't know, it was a good 6 to 9 months. I was thinking about that concept quite a bit, and just contemplating the idea that we were already dead. And it was a very interesting period in my life where I was looking at that concept. I was contemplating that quite a bit. And I ended up finding somebody online who went by the name, it still goes by the name SMQAI, who had put out a video saying we all died in 2012. And I ended up getting in touch with him, and he's now one of my friends, and we've discussed these topics before. He had me on his show to talk about a few things, and he's really been focused on the Mandela effect and the esoteric implications of it, and exploring that, and almost like a full esoteric system has kind of developed around his work on that topic. And the idea behind the whole Mandela effect is that for a lot of people, beyond the surface level of people remembering something differently than how it actually happened, like mass numbers of people. If you're not aware, the entry point to the whole Mandela effect is that you and large numbers of people remember something very clearly as having happened, and maybe even something significant to them in association with it. But when you look up the history, it doesn't conform to your memory. And it's not just your memory, but like I said, like tens of thousands of people remember it the same way you did. FPS Knifer says, I'm from the all gold C3PO timeline. So what he's referring to there, if you're not aware, but if you watch the Star Wars movies, the old Star Wars movies, C3PO has one leg that from the knee down is silver, and the rest of him is gold. But most people remember him being all gold. But there are toys that you can find that have all gold, or sorry, one leg that is, like I said, silver from the knee down. And if you watch the movie, he has one silver leg, but people remember him as being all gold, and most people. And it really can be disturbing to a lot of people to have their memories challenged in that way. And it's not just that, but there are several of them. We could go through a few. One of the most compelling and interesting, in my view, is the Ed McMahon thing. So, Peter says he was all gold in my timeline also. Ed McMahon, I think, of people of a certain age, most people remember him as having worked for a company called Publishers Clearinghouse and delivering oversized novelty checks to winners of the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. But if you look at the history of it, he never did work for that company. He did, however, work for a competitor that did very similar things called American Family Publishers, I think. But everybody remembers it as being Publishers Clearinghouse specifically. And even Johnny Carson, who was a co-host with Ed McMahon, or, you know, of course, Johnny Carson was the talk show host, and Ed McMahon was his sidekick, you could say, his co-host, right? And even there was a time when Johnny Carson came and he had an oversized novelty check that he brought somewhere, and he said, Ed McMahon couldn't come, but he wanted me to bring this. And it says right on it, Publishers Clearinghouse. And you'd think that if he knew him for so long, he wouldn't have got that wrong, you know? And the other thing about that is, even though Ed McMahon worked for a similar company that did that, he himself never delivered checks. Now, another weird thing about this is that there's a parody song that came out, and then in the music video, Ed McMahon is going to all the different houses and saying, hey, I want that check back, you know, which is weird because he never delivered checks. But everybody remembers it as that he did. And why would Ed McMahon participate in a joke that doesn't make any sense? How is he going to ask for checks back that he never gave in the first place? So people call that residue. So that's a term that has developed to describe things that conform to the memory, but not to the established history, you could say. Like if you looked up the history, it says that he never did it, but there is residue saying that he did. Another interesting one would be the whole mirror, mirror on the wall from Snow White. Everybody remembers it as mirror, mirror on the wall. And you know, who's the fairest of them all, or something along those lines, right? But the part that people really remember is mirror, mirror on the wall. But if you watch the movie, even if you get an old VHS cassette tape that you had from back when you were a kid, and you play that and rewind it and watch it, she doesn't say that. The witch doesn't say mirror, mirror on the wall. She says magic mirror on the wall. And it's very disturbing to a lot of people. And so one explanation is that a lot of people jumped to a different timeline, or a parallel universe, you could say. And they have the memories from the universe that they came from, or the parallel universe that they came from, but they're now in a similar one that has slightly different history to it. And, you know, people have described this as what the difference between the Orion arm. I can't remember exactly how that works, but something like that Earth is in a different place in the galaxy, even slightly. So that's related to that. So people sometimes refer to it in that way as well. We have another example in the chat here: Berenstein versus Berenstain Bears. Yeah, I remembered it the other way too. Berenstein Bears. And I had the books and I watched the cartoon when I was a kid. And I don't remember Berenstain Bears, but apparently that's what it is. So yeah, that's one of the explanations for it, is that we jumped to a different parallel universe. And SMQAI, he actually felt like that major shift happened on that day, that December 21st, 2012, which, like I said, I felt was a very significant moment as well. So we had a lot to talk about when I found that he was talking about these things. And one of his ideas was also that we all died. Now, there's this idea of quantum immortality that you may have heard of, and maybe I'm butchering the concept, but basically, if you break it down into a sentence, it's that essentially when you die, you just jump to another parallel universe and continue on to another one where you are still alive, essentially. And I've had experiences like that, where one time in particular, I remember I was in an office building, and I was in the elevator with a few other people, a handful of other people, maybe like 4 or 5 other people, and there was an accident, and it malfunctioned, and we all fell to our deaths, and we knew what was happening. Before we died, we realized, oh, this is the end, right? And I remember looking over at one of the other people that was in the elevator with me, and this is all happening in split second, in very quick, but how things happen when that time kind of slows down, and your mind is going a mile a minute. But I looked over at another guy that was in the elevator, and I could see panic just starting to, you know, he as he realized that these were his last moments, alive. He was like, the panic started to overtake him, and I felt it start to rise up in myself as well. And I was like, no, no, I don't want my last few moments alive to be filled with panic. That's not how I want to go out. So I kind of flung my consciousness to the highest possible place that I could conceive of. Just I calmed myself, and I kind of flung my consciousness into I don't know what to call it, but some high, metaphorically higher level of whatever. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but that's kind of what I did. Because you hear about like when Gandhi was assassinated, when he was shot, he called out the name of his god as he was dying. And this is one of the practices. This is one of the practices in occultism, is to kind of, at the moment of death, is to be in that place, to return to the ground of being, you could say. And I did that. And then there was this kind of timelessness that I experienced, and then I woke up in my bed in a different timeline, where I was a different person, kind of, but kind of not, but with a different history. I was a lot younger, and I still could remember that, but it felt like I was waking up from a dream as well. And it was kind of like I had just stepped in to another timeline that was already in progress. And that basically, when I died in the other parallel universe, I just kind of stepped into another one, and I inherited all of the memories, which is very dreamlike as well, because in a dream, you just spontaneously find yourself within a situation. And there's a whole history to that situation. Like, for example, in a dream, let's say there's a table in a dream, right? If you're not aware that it's a dream, there's this underlying, unspoken, unconscious even, assumption that that table at one point was wood, was planks, was a tree that somebody cut down, and that got processed into lumber, and was either in a factory or by a carpenter, was crafted into the form of a table. But that's not the actual truth of it, is it? It just spontaneously exists in the moment. And it kind of felt like that when I kind of jumped into that other timeline. It was like there was a whole history to it already, and I just inherited that history and just continued on from there. And so I feel like that's sort of the idea here, is that maybe there was a mass event where a huge number of people died all at once and jumped into another timeline, and that was almost the same, but there were certain key differences, and that that's one explanation for it, is that we all died, and that's how we jumped into the other timeline. And that's why there's so many of us that have these same memories from a different timeline, from a different parallel universe. Okay, we have a couple more comments here. Let me take a look. Have you, Clinton Simpson says, have you gone through the Scottish Rite of free and accepted Masons? I was raised in a Blue Lodge a few years ago and I've been contemplating it. Was wondering if you had a perspective. No, I have not. I was raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason in a Grand Orient of France based lodge. And I also experienced the rites in the Egyptian rite as well. So what a lot of people would consider clandestine Freemasonry or irregular Freemasonry is what I was involved with. But I only went to the third degree, and I became inactive after that. I never took any of the appendant bodies like Scottish Rite or York Rite. I never took any of those. Just the third degree I went to. And I found it to be a very valuable experience. I was very active in Freemasonry for about 5, maybe 6 years, and it was great training in top-notch ritualistic ritualism, I should say. Top-notch lodge ritual, top-notch group ritual. Freemasons seem to do it better than most groups. So that set a very high standard for me going forward. And when I experienced other things like the OTO initiation, the Minerval initiation, for example, which I participated in as a candidate and as an officer, and I've experienced multiple group lodge initiation rituals. And yeah, the Freemasonry really set a high standard for me. And to see people reading from books during ritual, that to me, I was very surprised after having seen people who were able to memorize like massive numbers of lines and, entire rituals, and, it's top notch. And I feel like that sets the standard. But yeah, I never went through the so-called higher degrees of the appendant bodies. And it's so, when I fully accepted the label of Luciferian for myself, when I really connected and resonated with that, it was actually after I had been raised to the third degree, and that was one of the catalysts for me to kind of come to that realization. So that's something that you might find interesting. And I do have some videos on my channel that talk more in depth about my experience with Freemasonry. I have a few videos that I go into in depth about it. Peter says, I remember the commercials of him delivering giant checks. Yeah, a lot of people, Ed McMahon, remember that. Remember Ed McMahon delivering those giant checks. Clinton Simpson says Mandela effect. Yeah. Where the name comes from is there were some people that remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison, which he didn't die in prison in the timeline that we're in right now. But there's a lot of people that remember that. To me, I didn't remember him dying in prison. I remember him, when he came out of prison, having a house that replicated the one that he lived in when he was in prison. But I don't remember him dying in prison. I don't come from that timeline, I guess. So maybe the thing is, if there are parallel universes, there would be several of them that would have had a similar catastrophic event that maybe killed off a lot of people, right? And that's one of the theories. And then so there could be people from multiple different similar parallel universes that ended up in this one. The other idea, and one that the Mayans talked about. So during the peak of the Mayan civilization, they believed that they were in what they referred to as the fourth creation. And that was like I like to refer to it as a great year, the long count, the one full long count cycle. And if we compare it to the whole zodiacal ages, which, if you ever heard that song, that, what was it, 60s or 70s song where they say this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and the whole concept of the new age ties all into that, where they talk about the transition from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And what they're talking about there is that on the morning of the spring equinox, the sun rises on the horizon against the backdrop of one of the signs of the zodiac. And roughly about every 2,000 years or so, roughly, we enter into, or it changes, basically. It changes what day, or sorry, what constellation is on the backdrop of the sun at the time of the sunrise. The age of Pisces, and Pisces being a fish, people associate that with, the dominance of Christianity, or the huge influence, I should say, at least, of Christianity over that last 2,000 year period. And that we are now entering into the age of Aquarius. And there's a lot of different people that talk about when that specific changeover happens, and there are different people that say different days, but it's a huge transition period anyway, so there isn't really a specific day, whether you're on this side of the cusp or that side of the cusp or right on it, it's still a transition period regardless. So you could say 1904, you could say 1966, you could say 2012, you could say some date in the future. But we are in that transition phase between the old age of Pisces and the new age of Aquarius. And like I said, that is an age that's kind of defined by that constellation. Now, in a solar year, we go through all 12 signs of the zodiac. The sun moves through the 12 signs of the zodiac in tropical astrology. So we can think of each one as like roughly a zodiacal month, right? And on a cosmic scale, we can say that an age, a zodiacal age, like the age of Pisces or the age of Aquarius, is like a great month. Well, the transition from one creation to the next in the Mayan view would be like a full year. So not just one age, but an entire cycle of ages has ended and a new one begins. So it's not just the transition from a great month to another great month. It's also the transition from one great year to the next great year. And so now the Mayan, in the Mayan view, we would now be in the fifth creation. So they're basically saying that there were, at the peak of their civilization, that there were three creations before them, and that they were living in the fourth creation, and that a new creation, a fifth creation, would begin translated to the Gregorian calendar would be December 21st, 2012. And so I feel like it's not just a zodiacal age, but a full great year. And some people say it's one complete wobble of the Earth on its axial tilt, right? And so each degree it goes through, and it'll go through the different signs of the zodiac. and each one would be like a great month. And then when you do one complete rotation, that's a great year. So this whole new Luciferian era that I talk about is the beginning of a new great year and a new creation. So I like to think of it as the end of the world did happen on December 21st, 2012, Common Era. And that a new creation spontaneously arose in its place, like in a dream, like in quantum immortality, like I discussed earlier, that a new one spontaneously arose in its place, and it feels like there's this history behind it, right? Like the table in a dream. But it spontaneously arose with its own kind of history built into it. And that's what the new Luciferian era is. And so let me take a look at what some of the other comments are here. So yeah, I like to say that the end of the world did happen, and that we are in a new world now, which I like to refer to as a new Luciferian era. That's my word that I like to use personally for it. You can use whatever word you want, right? And you can have a different date, whatever. But that's just kind of the paradigm that I'm using and that I am harnessing for my own work, and that I'm utilizing as a source of power and insight. And I do feel like things have been different since that date, right? Things have been radically different. And I keep thinking to myself, wow, this is the timeline that we're in right now. It's so wild, Did we ever think that we'd end up in a timeline that all of this is happening in? It's pretty incredible. So yeah, right now we would be in year 7 NLE. Let's see what other comments we have here in the chat. I wonder whether these memory glitches have always existed. FPS Knifer says, but nobody paid attention to these things until we were able to widely discuss them via the internet. It's a very young technology. That is true. That's something that would be difficult to know. Because you could just say, well, I just must have misremembered it, right, as an individual, but not knowing that mass numbers of people were also misremembering. And I do think that some of the examples are misremembering. I think that sometimes we remember them differently because they make more sense the way we remember them, that we edit it to make it make more sense. Like the Forrest Gump one. Everybody says, what did he say about the box of chocolates? Mama always used to say, and the way people remember that is life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. But if you watch the movie closely and listen to it, he actually says, Mama always used to say, life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, right? And it seems to make a little bit more sense to say life is like a box of chocolates. But to be fair, he was talking about something with past tense, right? Mama always used to say life was like a box of chocolates, right? So it does kind of make sense the way that he said it, but I think that might be an example of misremembering it, because in our minds it makes a little more sense the way that life is like a box, because only quoting that one part, it makes sense to say life is like a box of chocolates. But if you append it with Mama always used to say, does make a little bit more sense. But that's another thing that people talk about in the Mandela effect community, which people refer to themselves as MEs, or Mandela affected individuals. They say that it's interesting that a lot of times the way that it is in our timeline, the history of our current timeline seems to be a degraded version of what we remember from the timeline that we came from. And that actually is a very interesting concept too, because it actually really reminds me of a book by Robert Anton Wilson, which I think I actually have. Or no, not Robert Anton Wilson, Philip K. Dick. Sometimes I get too confused because they have such similar names, and they both talked about some really interesting things. But I think, yeah, right here, Ubic, which is short for ubiquitous, and I guess spoiler alert. If you don't want to hear this, maybe plug your ears for a second if you haven't read it, but. There's this thing that happens to some of the characters in the book where they have this technology where you are able to consult with people who have died, but they were put into cryogenic tubes. I'm not really kind of giving away too much here, but there are people that died and then were put into cryogenic tubes. And there's a certain amount of brain activity that they can still tap into. And so you can consult with those people for a certain amount of time before that full nerve energy or whatever fully kind of goes away. And the experience of the people in that cryogenic state is very similar to what would be in Vanilla Sky, where it's kind of like a lucid dream or a Matrix type thing, but it's degrading over time because their nerve signal is slowly losing power, or whatever you want to call it, right? And so that kind of really struck me as well, as that if everything is kind of degrading. And it's funny because my wife mentioned this too, that bananas, something seems to be wrong with bananas. They didn't used to go bad as quickly as they have been now, and they just seem different. Something seems different about bananas. And there was a period of time where we were just experiencing produce, like it just wasn't, you couldn't get fresh produce like that would last like it used to. And I was like, are we dead? Are we in like the afterlife and it's kind of slowly degrading or something, kind of like in Ubic, right? By Philip K. Dick. And he has some really amazing concepts in his books. If you have never read any of his books, I highly recommend him. I got several here. A lot of them have been made into movies. Like, for example, I feel like Vanilla Sky was potentially inspired by this book. And it was actually an American version of a Spanish movie called, Abre los Ultras or something like that. And Open Your Eyes was the name of it, and translated into English was the English title. English translation of the title of the Spanish book, or not book, movie. But I wonder if they were inspired by this book as part of their writing of the screenplay. It's not credited, but there are several other books that did get turned into movies that Philip K. Dick wrote. What's another one? A Scanner Darkly, I believe, is one that Philip K. Dick wrote. I've got another book. I think that it's, Minority Report. Minority Report was a short story. So I have a collection of short stories here by Philip K. Dick, including the Minority Report, which inspired the movie. What are some other ones? There's a bunch of them that ended up getting turned into movies because he has such great concepts. So if you haven't read Philip K. Dick, Highly recommended. So let's see what other comments we have here. Jody Wales says Theta Alpha State. That's a very interesting topic. RL Sushko says we call it our greater self, the God self. I think he's referring to when I was talking about projecting your consciousness into something higher. Jody Will says gamma, talking about a brainwave state. Ram is the name according to Baba Ram Das. FSP Knifer says in reference to the Gandhi story that I mentioned when he called out Ram when he was dying in his last moments. Let's see, Jody Will says AVGN on YouTube talks about Berenstain Bears in parallel universe Mandela effect subject. Interesting. Okay, I don't think I've seen that channel before. Fractal Reptilian says, love these live streams. I'm glad that you're enjoying it, Fractal. Marsader has a bunch of thumbs up and says, keep it up, Jeremy. Thank you very much. If anybody was, liking this so far, I encourage you to hit the like button on here. So, the drill. If you watch YouTube videos, it really helps the algorithm let people know that this is something that is a valuable video that maybe other people might want to watch, and it helps get more views on it and helps me in a bunch of different ways. Jody Wales says, you rock, Mr. Crow. Thank you very much, Jody. You rock, Jody. Marsader says, I haven't gotten to my second degree yet, so you're ahead of me, brother. The third degree is a good one. That's the big one. The really although the first degree I found incredible as well. It also has some very, very cool stuff in it. Second degree, a lot of people, the second degree is their favorite. And there's some really interesting things in the second degree that in the versions that I experienced myself, that very compelling stuff. J. Lloyd, I remember explicitly attending my uncle's funeral when I was young. Details down to the color of his suit and songs played, only to have him walk through the door years later at a family reunion. J. Lloyd, I also had a very similar experience where I didn't remember that my maternal grandfather had died. And I thought for sure he was still alive, and my mom was like, no, Jeremy, he passed on a few years ago. We spoke about it, and you weren't able to come because it was such a far distance or whatever. And I was like, I don't remember, and I was very upset, but I had a very similar experience to that, where I really, really did not remember. Maybe it was something that I had suppressed because it was traumatic to me, because he was, I loved him so much. J. Lloyd, third degree, Blue House here as well. Blue Lodge. Very cool, brother. Clinton Simpson says, the Master Mason degree was something else. Ever go through a chamber of reflection, Jeremy Crow? Absolutely, yeah. And I actually, if you go to some of my videos about the connection between Luciferianism and Freemasonry, or if there is a connection, I've related the story a couple times where I spoke about a particular symbol that I encountered in the Chamber of Reflections, and how I connected that with Lucifer. And I actually, tell you what it is right now here. That would be an example, an example of one of the symbols encountered in the Chamber of Reflections that I thought that I encountered in the version of the Chamber of Reflections that I experienced. At least there was a rooster, and that got me thinking, and that was one of the things. That was one of the Luciferian symbols that I found within Freemasonry, and I actually confronted a 33rd degree Mason who was currently the well, in the English version, it would be called the Most Sovereign Grand Commander, but like I said, the one that I was experiencing at that time, or that I was active in, was a Grand Orient of France derived lodge, and so it was the most puissant, can't remember the exact term, but basically French translation of that. But yeah, I confronted her, and that was the particular symbol I chose, even though there were things within the second and third degree rituals that also, to me, I felt were very Luciferian symbols in my personal interpretation. And I had actually confronted her about the rooster in particular, and I said, well, what does the rooster mean to you? And of course, she had to, it was a woman. It was a co-Masonic order, men and women equally accepted. And the reason that I chose that path, which some people, like I said, refer to as clandestine Freemasonry or irregular Freemasonry, I never didn't think of it that way, but to them, to the mainstream free and accepted Mason, Grand Lodge of England based, I was considered irregular or clandestine to them. I wasn't hiding anything. I don't consider it clandestine or irregular, but whatever. Anyways, she had to give a disclaimer saying, oh, well, I have my own interpretation and everybody can interpret it the way they want. But one thing that I like to think of, and she said something about the rising sun and such, but she goes, well, what do you think? And then I said, oh, well, I thought it was Lucifer. And we were walking at the time, and and we were up in the mountains of Colorado. It was incredibly beautiful. We were just way up in the mountains in Colorado and walking, and and she just stopped walking for a second and then kept walking again. But there was she missed a step. And then she, after a second, she said, why do you think that? And then I went through and I explained it, and I went in depth explaining it. And then there was a long pause, and I didn't give her an out. I just waited for her response. I didn't be like, just kidding, or, I didn't give her an out. I was waiting to see what she would say about it. And finally, when she did say something, it was like a minute, it felt like anyways, of silence. And then she actually said, so you figured it out. And I have a witness too. There was another member there that was with us, that there was only 3 of us there, but I do have one witness that could back me up probably. So she said, but don't go telling all the other people about this, because they're gonna think that they got tricked into worshiping the devil, and that's not what we mean by it. That's not what we mean by Lucifer when we say Lucifer and such. But yeah, at that point, kind of, I was on the inside, in the know. And I actually kind of probed some other members to see what they knew about that whole side of things. And especially some 33rd degree Masons. Like in person, I would talk to them and I would ask them about it. And most of the 33rd degree Masons that I talked to knew what I was talking about exactly. And some of them didn't want to talk about it, but they knew what I was talking about. And they're like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I don't feel like discussing it, But there were a couple people who, in particular, I remember, they seemed to genuinely not know what I was talking about. And it seemed almost like they were making connections in their head as I was talking. They were like, oh. And they were like, and I was like, did I just reveal something to them? Did I trigger them to realize it? And at that point I realized that it wasn't this thing that you learn when you become a 33rd degree Mason. It's just something that some members tune into, and some members don't. And you could get all the way to the 33rd degree and still not have tuned into that whole Luciferian current that you can tap into within Freemasonry. And you don't necessarily have to, you know, it's for the people that it's for. And other people don't tap into it or participate in that current within Freemasonry at all. But I did, and I wasn't a 33rd degree member. I was a 3rd degree member at the time, and there were other people that had clued into it at the 1st degree, entered apprentice. And so I feel like that whole Luciferian current isn't something that's revealed to you in the 33rd degree. That was my conclusion anyways. It's something that at any point you could connect to that current, whether it's, you know, there were symbols in the 1st degree, like I said, that that you could make that connection to and tap into that. I like to call it a bronze or a copper thread, you know, underlying, or you know, adjacent to or within, you know, that you don't necessarily have to tap into, but you can if you do. So there's that for you. Let me see what else we have here. Tree Maurice says hello. Hello, thanks for stopping in. RL Shishko says, this also thought to be the Kali Yuga, the final Yuga cycle or age. Hindus believe that human civilization degenerates spiritually during the Kali Yuga. Absolutely, that's a very, very good point. Let's see what else we have here. Peter says, this is good info. Thanks, man. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Peter. Jody Wales gave me a super chat, 99 cents. Thank you so much, Jody, for supporting the channel and all the work that I'm doing here with the donation. I really appreciate that, Jody. Beltane, yippee! Yeah, Beltane, Mayday, you know. It's kind of a very fertility cycle, right? You have the maypole, you know, which is a very phallic symbol. And in some of the ancient pagan rites, European pagan rites, you would have you dancing around the maypole, where you've got the ribbons that kind of weave around the pole. And then there was an orgy, you know. There was a massive group sex, and that's when a lot of babies would get conceived. And in some cultures that practiced this, they were considered to be kind of magical children in a sense, or children of the community, and not specifically of specific parents, because you wouldn't necessarily know who the parents were. You know, they didn't have DNA testing or Maury Povich or whatever around back in the day, right? So they thought they would raise them as kind of special children in a sense. And if it's one interesting thing about that is, if you were conceived on May Day, your due date would be around roughly around the winter solstice. Both of my children happen to be born around the winter solstice as well. So take that information as you will. Actually, my daughter that was born on the winter solstice of 2019, which was the Luciferian New Year, the beginning of year 7, new Luciferian Era. So there's that. My son was born a little later, but he actually was past his due date by like 2 weeks. And but yeah, so that's something interesting. You take it as you will, take that information as you will. But yeah, happy Beltane, happy May Day, happy Walpurgis. It not being midnight here where I am yet, or it's not day, you know, it's not daybreak yet. It would be Walpurgisnacht still. which is Walpurgis Eve or Walpurgisnight. Let's see. Oh, FPS Knifer says, "Do androids dream of electric sheep?" Right. So that book was made into the movie Blade Runner, which was that book was also written by Philip K. Dick. That was another movie that Philip K. Dick inspired with his book. Do androids dream of electric sheep? And then they turned it into a movie, which they changed the name to Blade Runner, which was a weird choice because that was the name of another book, another sci-fi book that was contemporary to Philip K. Dick's book. So that was weird that they would kind of steal that title, but I guess they thought it was a cooler title. Let's see. Interesting that they made movies based on those books. Yeah, I mean, there's such amazing concepts that he brings up in these books, and I find them incredibly entertaining. Oh, another one. Probably have heard there's a TV series that they made out of this one, The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, which is an interestingly also talks about alternate timeline and alternate history, where essentially World War II went differently, and there's bleed over between parallel universes. Yeah, so there's some really interesting concepts there. Like I said, I highly recommend PKD, his short stories and his novels. Let's see. Jody Wales has a lag check there. Yeah, there's a little bit of a lag I noticed. I have this up on my laptop as well, so I can read the comments a little easier than on the other screen that I'm using here. So, and I do see that there is a bit of a delay between what I'm recording and when it's actually on on YouTube there, which is kind of interesting. It's a time warp. I'm talking to you from the past. Fancy Veronica Cardozo Moreno, quite the name, says, "I loved the topic. Greetings from Colombia. Thank you for joining, Francie. Greetings from Canada." T. Marie says, "Jeremy, what is your take on fasting to achieve spiritual goals?" Actually, well, Etu Malku taught me a little bit about this, actually, and he talked about how fasting to get into a state of ketosis can be mind altering, and that's one of the first times I ever had heard that term, ketosis. Before the whole ketogenic diet craze that's kind of hit in the past, what was it, about 4 years ago that started to become a big thing. And before that it was Atkins, but they weren't using that term ketogenic, right? Yeah, I find it very valuable to do that. Fasting is very valuable on many levels. Obviously it's not something that could be maintained forever, of course. It's a thing that you temporarily engage into for a period of time for a specific purpose, and then you resume a diet of your choice, a pattern of eating that makes sense to you. But I've also done intermittent fasting for extended periods of time as well, where you would only eat during a certain window of time each day. And ideally that would be that you would have a period of fasting every single day of at least 12 hours. Really, it should be more like, probably more like 18 hours, or even 16 hours is very good as well. So you don't eat at all, not even snacks. Some people even say don't even have water, but I have water during my intermittent fasting. And you would only eat during the other time. So you're doing let's say you're doing 16 hours of fasting every day, then you would be eating during an 8-hour time frame, and only during that 8-hour time frame. And sometimes I'll even just have one huge meal in a day. I'll just get all of my caloric and macros in that one meal in that day, and then the rest of the time I'm not snacking, I'm not eating, just water. And yeah, sometimes I'll do that as well for periods of time, and I find it very valuable for spiritual goals and spiritual workings, to prepare for certain spiritual workings or esoteric practices, but also for health reasons as well. It can be very useful to be able to access that mode that your physical organism can enter into. Fractal says, I think ketosis and fasting are interrelated. Absolutely. Both make achieving a flow state much easier. Interesting you talk about flow as well. Yeah, that's something I've gotten into as well. And I feel like getting into flow is a ritual in itself. And I have actually incorporated some of these concepts of priming yourself to get into a state of flow. Now, if you're not familiar with that specific term, it's also referred to as being in the zone. And you experience time, I don't know what you call it, dilation or expansion. Time changes. So the way that time passes feels different when you're in flow or in the zone. And a lot of athletes and experience this state, as well as when you're doing other types of work as well. I find that I get into a state of flow when I'm cooking a lot. I'm very passionate about cooking and being very, I try and do everything very as best as I can, especially when I'm cooking for people that I love, like my family. I really want it to be really good, and I try and make every single element that I'm putting into the dish to be perfect. And I put a lot of care into each specific aspect of the meal. And I get into a state of flow often when I'm cooking. But yeah, I've incorporated, there's methods that you can utilize. There's charts and practices that you can do to encourage that state. And I've incorporated some of those, and it's a very chemical like thing that you can get your body into certain chemical states. And a sequence of chemical states can lead you into flow. So I've incorporated some of those things into some of the rituals that I've written for myself. For example, Peter says, did I miss anything here? No. Oh, so okay. Peter says, how does the rooster symbol relate to Lucifer? Well, I could go into it. But yeah, somebody else has a comment here saying, on the farm, the rooster welcomes the sunrise, just like the morning star. In the city, the crow is the bird who speaks first before sunrise. Yeah, so that's the brunt of it. There are some secondary characteristics of the crow, of the rooster, that make it also very fitting symbol of Lucifer. But that's the main one, is that it heralds the rising of the sun, and it heralds the day. It calls forth the light of day. It brings forth the light. It's the light bearer, the bringer of light. And Lucifer literally means light bringer, or bearer of light, or light bearer. And so that's the main connection right there, as well as Venus, when it's seen as the last bright object in the night sky before the sun rises. It's called the morning star, and that is also a symbol of Lucifer as well. Well, Lucifer, the word Lucifer was originally used, it's a Latin word, and was originally used by the ancient Romans to describe that celestial phenomenon when you look up in the sky and you see Venus. Looks a lot like a star. And even planets used to be referred to as wandering stars because they didn't have a fixed orbit, or not orbit, but movement through the sky. They moved in kind of their own way compared to the rest of the stars. So that's where the word planet comes from. It means wanderer, and they thought of them as wandering stars in a sense. So a lot of times planets get referred to as stars in a lot of the old texts and the old mythology and folklore. So Venus is the morning star, and that is the Latin word for that is Lucifer. So that's the connection. That's the main connection. But you also have, the whole ego thing. In folklore, you hear about the folklore of Lucifer as the fallen angel kind of had these grand ambitions of, well, really, he just wanted equality, and was booted out of heaven for it, Some people say he wanted to take over the throne, but if you look at a lot of the folklore, he wanted to be equal to God. He wanted equality with his creator, and so there's that part of the folklore, the whole ambition, and also the beauty, like a peacock, and that's another symbol that connects with Lucifer as well. And it's even used in the Yazidis, which was a form of Ismaili, a branch off of like esoteric Ismaili religion, and where they talk about Malik Taus, which was the peacock god, and some people think of it as Satan, and a lot of people think of it as Lucifer, and a lot of people think of it as the serpent in Eden that we talk about in Gnostic folklore and mythology. So that's in a nutshell, it comes down to the whole heralding the rising of the sun, calling forth the light of day. Let's see. Clinton says, really enjoyed your thoughts. Much appreciated. Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed it, Clinton. Jody Wales, 15-minute lag in my dimension shift location. Wow, that's quite the lag. Jody also says, I've found charging of my energetic body on an empty stomach is best. Kabbalistic cross, lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, etc., etc. I mean, most of the work that I do, most of the esoteric work that I do, I try and do it on an empty stomach at least, whether fasting or not. If it's certain types of work, I will do extended fast for as well to prepare for it, not just having an empty stomach. But I tend to wait until after an esoteric working to eat, and sometimes I'll even have that incorporated as part of the ceremony, as part of the ritual, as part of the working, where there'll be food involved, and at the conclusion of the work, then I'll eat the food. And that kind of grounds it, and a lot of times I'll have the food in the ritual space with me to kind of absorb some of those energies, and then I'll take that into my body, my physical body, to manifest into the world through my body as a vehicle. Jody also says fasting for 2 days and I can tell a big difference in my work. Absolutely. BR as the first comment in this live stream tonight, that I haven't seen BR. I haven't seen you make a comment yet until now, but I'm glad that you decided to participate. The Muslim variation, he was so obsessed with God that he wouldn't admit that God was equal to Adam even when God insisted. Yeah, I've heard that. There's talks about that where that the angels were made of celestial fire and that humans were made of earth, and that a being of fire would not bow down to a being of earth. And that's one other variant of that folklore and mythology that I've heard as well. Deshaun Lockhart, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that you giving support in that way to my channel and to the work that I'm doing. I really appreciate that, Deshaun. Thank you very much. T. Marie says, funny, just as you're speaking on birds / rooster, the morning birds begin to chirp. It's around 5 a.m. here. Synchronicity. And it's interesting, that word synchronicity comes from Carl Gustav Jung, the psychologist that was a student of Freud. And one of the things that got him to think about that concept of synchronicity, of a meaningful coincidence, that was something that, on the surface seemed coincidental, but it was so meaningful that he had to come up with another term to describe it. It was beyond just coincidence. It was so meaningful that and symbolic, almost like as if it was a symbol in a dream that you could interpret, right? But in the waking experience, you see it. And he called that a synchronicity. And one of the things that triggered that realization with Carl Gustav Jung was a bird that kind of flew into his window during a session he had with a client. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I remember it had something to do with a bird, I think flying into the window or something, and not like hitting the window, but actually coming into an open window and coming into their room that he was having a session with a client with. And it had such a meaningful symbolic message that he couldn't just dismiss it as coincidence. It was something more, a synchronicity. So it's interesting, that you had that synchronistic event. And it's also kind of interesting, there's a whole history of birds giving symbolic messages. And of course, that is a form of divination or augury through interpreting natural phenomenon like patterns of birds flying. There's, of course, the number of crows that you see means something, and there's a rhyme that goes along with that tells you like what to expect when you see one crow versus 2 or 3 or 4. And my grandmother, where the name crow comes from, which was actually originally an Ojibwe word, which was ndeg. That word ndeg in the Ojibwe language actually translates to crow. And that's where that comes from. That's where the family name Crow comes from. It's from my grandmother on my father's side. And actually, she had taken the name of her husband, which was Mackenzie, and then so a lot of us had the name Mackenzie. And then after my paternal grandfather, who was Mackenzie, he died, then a lot of the people in our family either added Crow to their name to honor our grandmother, or just simply changed completely over to Crow. So that's where Crow actually comes from, is my grandmother. It's the family name of my grandmother, and she believed in that, and she would take it very seriously when she saw a crow or several crows. And it's funny, my sister, my older sister Tina, she actually remembers one time when our grandmother said, look, there's a crow. And it was one crow, which meant death. And she said, oh, yeah, one crow means death. And she was like, oh, what? So you made me look at it too? Thanks a lot. And she goes, no. If another person sees it, then it's almost like there was two crows. So it's almost like she was kind of staving off that particular interpretation by getting another person to see it. Instead of just her seeing it alone, that would have been a much more strong omen of death than if two people saw one crow. It almost was like there was two crows, she would say. So that's kind of a funny story relating to that. Let's see here. Fractal says, DJing puts me in a nearly instant flow state. Oh yeah, music. That's definitely a lot of musicians get into that state of flow, and sometimes they talk about being in the pocket. Getting in the pocket is a term that a lot of musicians use, and I've experienced that as well myself. Or dancing, dancing to music. Sometimes you can get into a state of flow. I approach my performances as a ritual that I've written for myself. Music is my magic. Absolutely, Fractal. I totally agree. Deshaun says, this is interesting stuff. T. Marie says, okay, wow. Yeah, I'm glad that you guys are really appreciating some of this stuff here. Looks like I'm all caught up on the messages now. This is why I love this guy, T. Marie says. Tree Marie, sorry. I say T. Marie because a lot of times we used to call my sister that. Tia Maria, sometimes even we would call her. Hail Satan says, great show. Excellent, brother. All the best for you. Hail Lucifer. Hail Satan. Hail Lucifer, hail Satan, and hail thyself. Absolutely. How long have we been going for? Wow, it's getting close to 2 hours now. Usually, the last couple that I've done in this space as well, the live streams that I've done here have lasted just under 2 hours. So I do feel like this live stream is kind of gradually kind of winding down now. I do feel that kind of energy of the live stream kind of winding down. So I think we are, if we have a couple more comments or questions or anything that you wanted to bring up before we end it. But yeah, we'll start to wind down here. I'll end this relatively soon. Oh, we got some people giving the horns in the chat. Yeah, so was there anything else that I was trying to think of that I wanted to cover in this particular live stream? I wanted to kind of talk about how this was kind of a fertility rite, a day. So be careful, any of you who are doing any kind of sex magic rites today, that they sometimes can result in conception. But so make sure that that's something that you might want if you're going to be doing that. If not, then to take precautions, because like I said, both of my children were born around or on the winter solstice, and take that as you will. Jody says, Ravens of Antimony. Any good books? I don't know what you're referring to there. I do really like the alchemical book by Basil Valentine, The Triumphal Chariot of Antimony, that he describes using antimony to try and create the Philosopher's Stone. And he didn't quite get there, but he did create a very powerful transmutation agent, which he called, what did he call it? Lapis ignis, I believe. or Firestone. This is the Firestone, which was not quite the Philosopher's Stone, but a very powerful transmutation agent in its own right. And I have that book here somewhere, but I don't really need to show you. I guess I've got it here. It's something that I've studied quite a bit. Lab alchemy has opened up my mind to so many different levels of understanding of some of these things. It's been huge influence on me, my work with lab alchemy as well as internal alchemy, both forms of alchemy, and Eastern as well as Western alchemy, like Hermetic alchemy and Taoist internal alchemy in particular. Those are some of the biggest influences on my personal work. Ars Casau books? Yeah, I don't know what that is either. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, so yeah, alchemy. That's huge, and I feel like that's the goal of alchemy is the Philosopher's Stone, right? But also the elixir of life, which is actually just another name for the same substance, which is the quintessence itself, which literally means fifth element. And that was something that I didn't understand until I studied alchemy either. That, how you have the pentagram, you have the 5 elements on there. You've got the earth, air, fire, water, and spirit, as often referred to. I don't like to use that word because I feel like there's a lot of baggage added to that word spirit, and it implies non-physical, which I don't feel like. I feel like there is a physical manifestation of spirit that is the quintessence, has a physical thing to it, a physical vehicle to it, a substance to it. You can create the quintessence in a physical thing in a lab. You can you can transform yourself, and generate the quintessence within yourself as well. Jody Wales, have you ever seen fairies? That's another rabbit hole that I don't have time to get down. But yeah, there's some interesting experiences that I've had for sure. But maybe that we can cover that in a different live stream. Starfire 2017 says your podcast helped direct me down this new path. Oh, great. Yeah, I'm really proud of those podcasts, those Luciferian Research Society podcasts that I did with Matt. And he really improved those. He really helped me a lot on those podcasts and made them amazing. So. But yeah, we haven't done one in a long time. I was thinking of doing some of them on my own. But these live streams are almost like my new vehicle that's kind of replacing the podcast in a sense. Although those other ones were very focused, and I had specific things that I wanted to cover during those, and I planned them out very carefully, and I'm very proud of them. And especially the one on tarot and the one on lucid dreaming. Both of those, I'm very, very proud of both of those particular podcasts from the Luciferian Research Society podcast. Those two, if you're going to listen to any two of those podcasts, listen to those. They are so chock full of information. I'm really proud of those two in particular. Let's see here. I've got many questions about alchemy. Yeah, we're gonna have to cover that in a different different day, because like I said, we're kind of winding down. I don't want to start whole new subjects, although I did just kind of rant on about alchemy there a bit. Where can you find the podcasts? Just I would do a search for Luciferian Research Society podcast. And I encourage everybody to join Luciferian Research Society as well. It's a private, you might as well say, social networking site that is at luciferianresearch.org. You can listen to the podcast there. If you're a member, there's also a live chat room that you can just kind of pop into and talk with anybody who happens to be on there. It requires a very, very modest subscription fee just to cover the expenses that I incur in maintaining that site. It's one of the more expensive websites that I have up. So that's why I had to charge. But it's just $10 for a whole year. Or if you want to go month to month, it's only $2. So, that's, pocket change for most people. So if you wanted to join that, it's not really all that active right now, but I encourage you to participate in any of the old conversations and revive any of the old content that's in there. And there's a ton of stuff to go through and read. It's treasure trove of content that people have contributed over many, many years. I think, when was it founded? 2007, I believe. August 2007, I think, was when I created the Luciferian Research Society. And it's not an order. It's more like an artist's guild or a collective of people that come together from various different paths within the left-hand path, not just Luciferians, but to kind of almost like a think tank or a way to get people together to cross-pollinate between the various different concepts and to collaborate on real-world projects together and to promote whatever projects that you're engaged in. So I encourage anybody to join that and let me know that you've joined it, and we can talk on there and interact. That'll be very fun. But yeah, the podcasts are also there as well on luciferianresearch.org. So yeah, winding down. Tree Marie says on it with a dancing emoji. That's funny. J. Lloyd currently studying over the self-initiation rite of the Ordo Luciferi. Yeah, so that is a ritual that I'm very proud of. That's out there in the public domain that you can, if you just get a hold of the material, just don't ask permission, just do it. I'm a big proponent of that. Is just don't ask permission. This is the left-hand path, folks. You don't need to, ask permission to do things. Just do it. And that one, actually, it goes through that alchemical process. That's what that formula behind the self-initiation rite of the Ordo Luciferi, the Incipio degree. That's what you're doing, is you are putting yourself through the stages of alchemy to generate the quintessence. And you can apply that ritual formula to creating your own rituals. And you can use those words of power. Once you've done the self-initiation, then you can take that formula and utilize it to create new rituals, and you can use those same words of power at those points. And if you're unsure of how to do that kind of thing, you could study Israel Regardie's book, The Golden Dawn, where he has the Z documents, or if you're American, you might say Z documents. But I believe they would have called it Z documents, just like I'm calling it. But where they talk about how you can take the formula, the ritual formula of an initiation rite, and apply it to writing new rituals using that same formula for practically any purpose you want. And I do actually have a ritual that I created based off of the formula of the Incipio rite of the Order Luciferi, that self-initiation rite that you're referring to, J. Lloyd, where it's actually called the Rite of Forbidden Knowledge. And it was performed at Flambeau Noir 2017 in Ottawa, Canada, by other people, which was amazing for me to experience some other people performing this ritual. And it's almost like a Gnostic Luciferian Eucharist, where an apple, a physical fruit, apple, an apple, and an actual apple is put through that alchemical process in that same formula, as if you were almost like initiating it. And then it gets cut up and shared among the participants, and you consume that apple. And it's like the apple of forbidden knowledge, right? The rite of forbidden knowledge. So that's a ritual that I wrote, and that will be in a new version of the book that I had put out, the Initiation into the Left-Hand Path. I'm rewriting it and putting it out as Initiation into the New Luciferian Era, expanding on it, adding additional material, and having the ceremonies that I have in that book form more of a cohesive whole. And I also am going to be including that extra ritual, the Rite of Forbidden Knowledge, and some notes on how I generated it using the formula of the Ordo Luciferi self-initiation rite, and how you can do that for other purposes as well if you want. Jody says Z-Doc is real good. Yeah, I highly recommend it if you're interested in that kind of work, which is very powerful. Once you've experienced an initiation rite, then now you have access to that formula to create your own rituals that are going to be very powerful and draw from the egregore of the order that you've initiated into, including the egregore of the Ordo Luciferi that you could draw from if you're using the formula for the Incipio self-initiation ritual. So there you go, a reservoir of power that you can draw from once you've done that self-initiation rite, and utilize it in your workings after that. So I think that's probably a good time to wind this down. Thank you again for those who gave the super chats. I really appreciate that. It really helps encourage me to keep doing these live streams. That Jody and Deshaun, thank you very much for those super chats. And thank you for everybody who participated in this live stream, who just showed up for it, for one thing. And for anybody who left comments in the live chat, that we could interact and form this community that we're building together around these topics. And I hope to see some of you in the Luciferian Research Society as well. And if you are watching this video as an archive later on, you can always leave a comment in the video below. If you weren't able to be part of the live chat, you can still leave a comment on this video, and I'll try and get to it as much as I can. I try and go back. Sometimes it takes me a long time to get to it. I've even gone back and responded to comments that I had missed, that had been there unanswered for a couple of years even, that I've noticed. I'm like, oh, I didn't actually reply to that comment, and then I reply to it. But sometimes it'll take a long time to get to it, but I do try and get to every comment if I'm able to. Sooner rather than later, hopefully. But yeah, if you're watching this as an archive, then go ahead and leave a comment below, or a question, and I'll try and respond to it as soon as I am able to. Tree Marie says, when's your next live stream? Well, I don't know. This is the live stream that I've probably given the most notice for before actually doing, which was only an hour and a half. But sometimes I'll only give like 15, 20, 30 minutes before to say that I'm going to be doing a live stream. So the best thing to do is to subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell, and then you'll get notifications on your YouTube to let you know that there's going to be a live stream or that I've gone live. That's probably the best way. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Crow, and I always announce a live stream there as well. And you can turn on notifications on Twitter as well, so that if I make a post on Twitter, you'll get a notification that I did so. And like I said, I always put a post on Twitter before going live to let you know. So that's another way that you could find out or stay on top of it to find out if I'm going to be doing a live stream or not. And lately I've also been posting on Facebook that I'm going to be doing a live stream as well. I started becoming active on Facebook more again after being away from it for about a year. So yeah, that's another place that you could find an announcement, although you might not see it. I don't know if there's a way to set up notifications on there. Maybe on my page, rather than the personal account, rather the Jeremy Crow page, you could also I think you might be able to set that up so you get notifications on that. And I post on that as well to let people know that there's an upcoming live stream. But like I said, usually I don't give very much notice. I'm trying and plan these things out better so that I do give more notice, but yeah, I don't know when I'll have the next one. Those are the best ways to find out, is to set up notifications on my YouTube channel here or on Twitter are probably the two best ways. Bunch of people giving the horns, black hearts as well. Jody says thank you, or Jay Lloyd says thank you so much for your time and sharing your wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for being part of this live stream, Jay Lloyd. I really appreciate your interaction, your input, your comments and questions. KK says it's amazing that you're able to talk to us through a camera for so long. Super grateful and really enjoyed it. Yeah, I think the 2 hours seems like a really good amount of time for a live stream. It feels like. Jody Wells, cheers. I treasure these talks. Thank you. I treasure them too. Tree Marie says the same. Thank you. Deshaun says agreed 100%. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate all this. And if you watched my YouTube videos, you know what I'm about to say. Until next time, stay lucid.